He has to do something terrible.
A little tighter, Denny. Nice.
It's in his blood.
For millions of viewers, Max Wright seemed to have everything. He was the face of one of television's biggest hits, recognized around the world and living the kind of success most actors spend a lifetime chasing. But the very show that made him famous may have planted the seeds of his downfall. Behind the laughter, the success, and the family-friendly image was a growing frustration that few people understood. As the pressure mounted, Wright found himself slipping into a darker and darker chapter of his life. Then, just when it appeared he might finally be putting the pieces back together, a devastating medical diagnosis and a shocking public scandal would turn his life upside down. In the years that followed, Max retreated further from the spotlight, carrying burdens that most fans never knew existed. What happened during his final years was far more heartbreaking than the public ever realized. The rise of Max Wright. Max Wright was not supposed to be a television star. He was a classically trained stage actor who had shared Broadway with James Earl Jones and appeared in films directed by Bob Fosse and Warren Beatty. He took roles that challenged him, worked with directors who respected him, and built a career that any serious actor would envy. But then one show would push him toward a darkness that would consume his life for decades. Max was born on August 2, 1943, in Detroit, Michigan. His father, George Herman Wright, worked as a road mechanic, fixing cars and trucks so that other people could keep moving. His mother, Donna Mae Angel, worked as a grocery store cashier, ringing up purchases and making change for strangers. They were working-class people who did not have connections to the entertainment industry and did not dream of their son becoming an actor. When Max was still young, his family moved from urban Detroit to the northern suburb of Southfield, Michigan. The change of scenery was significant. Detroit in the 1940s and 50s was a bustling industrial city, but Southfield was quieter and more residential. The kind of place where families could afford a small house with a small yard. Max spent his formative years there, growing up in a household that valued hard work and did not have much time for frivolity. The discovery of theater came at Southfield Senior High School. Max auditioned for school musical productions and, to his own surprise, landed the lead roles in 2 major shows. The experience was transformative. He discovered that he had a talent for making people believe that he was someone else. He discovered that he could stand on a stage and become a character that the audience would care about. He graduated in 1961 and decided that acting was not just a hobby, but a profession. He moved to New York to train at the prestigious National Theater School, one of the most respected acting programs in the country. The training was so rigorous and demanding. Students were taught to leave their egos at the door and focus on serving the character and the story. Max excelled. He was not the most charismatic actor in his class, but he was one of the most disciplined. He showed up on time, knew his lines, and never complained about the small roles he was given. He made his official Broadway debut in 1968 in the original production of The Great White Hope, a play that starred James Earl Jones in the lead role. Sharing a stage with Jones, who would later become famous as the voice of Darth Vader, was an education in itself. Max learned how a true professional handles the pressure of 8 shows a week. He learned how to keep a performance fresh, even after months of repetition, and how to find new meaning in lines that had been spoken hundreds of times before. Throughout the 1970s and early 80s, Max established himself as a highly reliable Hollywood character actor. He appeared in Bob Fosse's All That Jazz, a film about the chaotic life of a theater director that was nominated for 9 Academy Awards. He worked with Warren Beatty on Reds, a sprawling historical epic about the Russian Revolution. He took a role in The Sting 2, the sequel to a film that had won 7 Oscars. None of these roles made him a star, but they paid the bills and kept him working in an industry where most actors struggled to find steady employment. He also maintained regular television contracts on network shows, appearing in guest roles and recurring parts that demonstrated his range. He could play a compassionate father, a stern boss, or a nervous bystander with equal skill. Casting directors knew that Max Wright would show up prepared and deliver a solid performance. He was not flashy, but he was dependable. In 1986, Max was cast as Willie Tanner on NBC's ALF, a sitcom about a suburban family that takes in a wisecracking alien from outer space. The show became an immediate global phenomenon, winning the People's Choice Award for Favorite New Television Comedy in 1987. Children loved the puppet. Parents loved the humor. And Max Wright, the classically trained stage actor, was suddenly a household name. Unfortunately, the fame was not what he had signed up for, and the show would take a devastating toll on him in a way that no one watching at home could see. The grinding stress of the ALF set. Behind the laughs and the puppet jokes, the set of ALF was a difficult place to work, and the stress of making the show pushed Max Wright closer to the edge than anyone realized. The technical setup of the show was unusual. The ALF soundstage was built 4 feet above the actual studio floor. The reason for this was simple. The puppeteers needed to operate the ALF puppet from below, so the floor had to be elevated to give them space to hide. The result was a maze of open trap doors that were constantly being uncovered and covered as the puppeteers moved from one position to another. For the human actors, this meant walking across a floor that had holes in it. A false step could send someone crashing down 4 feet onto the hard studio floor below. The physical danger was real and constant. The human actors faced a daily risk of falling through the open holes, and this created high levels of physical tension and stress while shooting scenes. An actor trying to deliver a funny line could not relax because he was also trying not to have an accident. The crew did their best to mark the trap doors and warn the actors when they were moving into dangerous areas, but accidents still happened. Wright, who was already uncomfortable with the technical demands of working with a puppet, found the floor situation to be a constant source of anxiety. The shooting hours were also brutal. A standard 30-minute sitcom episode usually takes a few days to film. But because of the endless technical resets required for a single puppet, an episode of ALF routinely took 20 to 25 hours to complete. That is nearly a full day of continuous work for a single episode. The human actors had to hit their marks perfectly every time, because the puppeteers could not reset quickly if someone made a mistake. The puppeteers had to coordinate their movements with the actors' lines. The camera operators had to frame shots that hid the trap doors and the puppeteers below. Every element had to work together perfectly, and that perfection took an enormous amount of time. The psychological toll was perhaps worse than the physical exhaustion. Wright was deeply miserable playing a secondary support character to an inanimate object. He had trained at the National Theatre School. He had shared a Broadway stage with James Earl Jones. He had worked with Bob Fosse and Warren Beatty. Now he was playing the straight man to a furry puppet, and the puppet was getting all the laughs. The mechanical puppet received all the premium punchlines, while Wright played the repetitive, straight-faced target of the alien's jokes. His character existed to set up the puppet's one-liners, and Wright found that professionally diminishing. The show's creator, Paul Fusco, insisted that everyone treat the puppet as a real, living entity on set. He did not want the actors to think of ALF as a prop or a piece of equipment. He wanted them to act as if they were performing opposite a real alien. This approach worked for some of the cast members who found it easier to react naturally when they treated the puppet as real. But, for Wright, the insistence on pretending that a piece of foam rubber was alive felt absurd. He was a serious actor being asked to have conversations with a puppet, and the cognitive dissonance made him angry. The environment became so toxic that Wright experienced a physical breaking point on set. During one particularly frustrating day of filming, he launched into a physical altercation with the ALF puppet. He grabbed the puppet and began shaking it. He yelled at it and even tried to tear it apart. The puppeteers inside the trapdoors could not believe what was happening. Producers had to run onto the set and physically pull Wright off the puppet. The incident was kept quiet, but everyone who witnessed it knew that something was deeply wrong. The final outburst came on the last day of filming Season 4 in 1990. The moment the final scene wrapped, Wright walked directly off the stage without speaking to anyone. He did not say goodbye to the cast. He did not thank the crew. He did not acknowledge the puppeteers who had worked alongside him for 4 years. He packed his bags, completely skipped the cast wrap party, and drove away from the studio. He never looked back. The show that had made him famous had also broken something inside him. The stress of the technical setup, the brutal hours, the psychological humiliation of playing second fiddle to a puppet, and the physical altercation with the ALF puppet itself had pushed him to a breaking point. He needed to get away from ALF to save himself. But the damage had already been done, and his body was about to send him a warning that he could not ignore. The first major crisis. Following the abrupt end of ALF, Wright made a deliberate choice to pivot back to the kind of work that had sustained him before the puppet came into his life. He landed guest spots on high-quality productions, including a role as Terry, the original manager of Central Perk on Friends, the coffee shop where the main characters spent most of their time. He also appeared as Gwenter Wendt in Tom Hanks's HBO miniseries From the Earth to the Moon, a critically acclaimed production that told the story of the Apollo space program. These roles were not glamorous, but they were respectable, and Wright was grateful to be working in environments where the actors were treated like professionals rather than puppeteers. In 1995, while he was working to redefine his professional image, Wright received news that would change his life. He was diagnosed with lymphoma, a severe type of blood cancer that attacks the body's lymphatic system, which is part of the immune system. The diagnosis came after he had been experiencing severe lethargy and other persistent physical symptoms that he had initially dismissed as stress or exhaustion. His doctor ordered medical testing in early 1995, and the results confirmed what Wright had been afraid to hear. He had cancer. The treatment was brutal. Wright immediately underwent intensive rounds of chemotherapy, the kind of treatment that leaves patients nauseous, weak, and unable to keep food down. He also received targeted radiation treatments, which burned his skin and drained his energy further. The treatments forced him to take a temporary hiatus from intense screen schedules. He could not work because he could barely get out of bed. The man who had survived the chaos of the ALF set was now fighting for his life in a hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and strangers. After months of treatment, Wright did something remarkable. He pushed the cancer into medical remission. The doctors told him that he had responded well to the therapies and that there was no sign of active disease in his body. The news should have been a relief. But Wright knew that remission was not the same as cure, and he was determined to make the most of whatever time he had left. Once he was well enough to work again, Wright made a decision that surprised some of his advisors. He completely turned his back on Hollywood. He did not want to return to the world of television sitcoms and guest spots. He wanted to reclaim his dignity on stage, where he had started his career. He returned to Broadway, the same New York theater district where he had made his debut in The Great White Hope nearly 30 years earlier. In 1998, Wright achieved his ultimate artistic redemption. He earned a prestigious Tony Award nomination for Best Featured Actor in a Play for his performance as Pavel Lebedev in Anton Chekhov's Ivanov. The nomination was a validation of everything he had worked for since his training at the National Theatre School. The critics praised his performance as nuanced and deeply felt, the work of a master actor who understood the complexities of Chekhov's characters. He did not win the award, but the nomination itself was a victory. He had proven that he was more than the man who had talked to a puppet. The cancer remission and the Tony nomination gave Wright a second chance. He re-entered the mainstream television market from 1999 to 2001 by co-starring as Max Denby, a highly abrasive boss, on ABC's comedy series titled Norm. The role was not as demanding as ALF had been, and the set was not as chaotic. Wright showed up, delivered his lines, and went home. He was content, or at least he appeared to be, but the piece was an illusion. The cancer that had gone into remission was still lurking in his body, waiting for the right moment to return. And before that happened, a different kind of crisis would explode into the public eye, one that would humiliate Wright in ways that no one could have predicted. The devastating 2001 scandal and public humiliation. The trouble began quietly, with an incident that could have been a wake-up call if Wright had been ready to hear it. In January of 2000, he was arrested by the Los Angeles Police Department in Hollywood, California, for driving under the influence of alcohol. According to the police report, Wright had hit a fixed object in a non-injury traffic accident. No one was hurt, but the damage to his car and to the object was significant enough that officers were called to the scene. They administered field sobriety tests, which Wright failed. He was processed at the local station and released on a bail of $7,500. The arrest did not make major headlines. It was treated as a minor incident involving a minor celebrity. Wright paid his fines, attended his court dates, and hoped that the story would fade away. For a while, it did. However, in 2001, the National Enquirer, a tabloid known for aggressively pursuing celebrity scandals, published a front-page headline that completely shattered Wright's career recovery. The story was accompanied by photographs and detailed descriptions of something that Wright had hoped would never see the light of day. The tabloid had obtained hidden camera video footage recorded inside a dingy, trash-filled apartment somewhere in Los Angeles. The footage was grainy and poorly lit, but the images were clear enough to identify the man sitting on the bed. The video documented something that was shocking to fans who remembered Wright as the wholesome father from ALF. The tape clearly caught Wright sitting on a bed, actively using an illegal substance out of an improvised homemade device. He was not alone. Two unidentified men were in the room with him, though their faces were not as clearly visible. The video caught Max Wright in the act with the other men. The three of them appeared to be in the middle of an extended illicit substance binge, surrounded by trash, empty containers, and the general disarray of a space that had not been cleaned in weeks. The tabloids capitalized on the tape aggressively, but they also misrepresented what it showed. Many outlets claimed that Wright was starring in illicit adult films, a rumor that spread quickly across the internet and through gossip columns. This was false. The tape was not a commercial production. It was a private recording of an addiction binge that someone in the room had secretly taped without Wright's knowledge or consent. That person then sold the tape to the paparazzi, who sold it to the tabloids. The fallout from the Enquirer's story was immediate and brutal. Wright's phone stopped ringing. The producers who had been considering him for roles suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere. His representatives issued a brief statement acknowledging that he had made mistakes and was seeking help, but the damage was already done. The image of Wright actively engaging in such a terrible activity was burned into the public consciousness. The man who had once been nominated for a Tony Award, who had shared a stage with James Earl Jones, who had been a trusted face in millions of American homes, was now a punchline. Late-night talk show hosts made jokes about him. Tabloid television programs ran the grainy footage over and over, blurring the faces, but not the shame. Wright retreated from public view after the story broke. He did not give interviews. He did not defend himself. He did not try to explain that the video had been recorded without his knowledge, or that he had been struggling with addiction for years. He simply disappeared, hoping that the public would eventually forget. But the public does not forget easily, and the tabloids were not finished with him. In 2003, while still reeling from the global humiliation of the video, Wright was arrested a second time for driving while intoxicated. This time, the incident occurred in Valati, New York, a small town where major news was rare, and a celebrity driving under the influence was the biggest story of the year. According to the police report, Wright lost control of his vehicle, destroyed 2 residential mailboxes, and knocked over a traffic sign before his car came to a stop. No one was injured, but the property damage was significant enough that officers were called to the scene. Wright was arrested, processed, and charged with driving while intoxicated. His driver's license was legally suspended for 6 months. The second incident did not generate the same level of media frenzy as the Inquirer video, but it reinforced the narrative that Wright was a man out of control. He had been given a chance to recover from the first arrest, and he had failed. He had been given a chance to recover from the video, and he had failed again. The legal system treated him as a repeat offender. The public treated him as a cautionary tale. And Wright, who had once dreamed of being taken seriously as a stage actor, was now known primarily for his addictions and his humiliations. The scandal and the battle with addiction were not the end of Max Wright's story. He would continue to act in small roles, continue to struggle with his health, and continue to live in the shadow of the puppet that had made him famous. But the public humiliation of 2001 marked a turning point. After that, he was never quite the same. The cancer that had gone into remission would eventually return. The addictions that had been exposed on the front page of the National Enquirer would continue to pull him under. And the final years of his life would be defined by a quiet, sad decline that few people outside his family ever witnessed. The tragic final years of Max Wright. The combination of public mocking, the brutal media frenzy surrounding his addiction, and the constant labeling of his name as a Hollywood joke caused Wright to spiral into deep clinical depression and extreme social isolation. He reportedly stopped answering phone calls from friends. He stopped returning messages from agents who had once booked his roles. He stopped leaving his home except when absolutely necessary. The man who had stood on Broadway stages and accepted applause from thousands of strangers could no longer tolerate being seen in public. He was afraid of what people would say, afraid that someone would recognize him and shout something cruel, afraid that the tabloids would print another story about his downfall. To avoid public scrutiny and paparazzi, Wright completely withdrew from television. He stopped auditioning for sitcoms and guest spots. Instead, he spent his final active years working in low-paying regional theater, far from the bright lights of Hollywood and New York. The pay was terrible. The audiences were small, but the people who came to see those plays were there for the art, not for the scandal. They did not bring cameras. They did not shout questions about the controversial video. They just watched the performance and applauded at the end. For Wright, that was enough. His final major performances included a production of No Man's Land in 2007, a play by Harold Pinter that required the kind of emotional depth that only an older actor could bring. He also appeared in Shakespeare in the Park's production of The Winter's Tale in 2010, performing for audiences who sat on blankets and picnic chairs, enjoying the art under the open sky. These were not glamorous roles. They did not pay well, but they kept Wright connected to the craft that had sustained him since high school, and they allowed him to end his career on his own terms, doing the work that he loved. In 2017, Wright suffered a massive emotional blow that he never fully recovered from. His wife of 52 years, Linda Ibarondo, passed away from breast cancer. The two had been married since 1965, long before ALF made him famous, long before the scandal, and long before the problems with the law. Linda had stayed with him through everything. She did not leave when the Inquirer published the video. She did not leave when he was arrested for driving under the influence. She did not leave when he retreated into depression and isolation. She was the one constant in his life, the person who reminded him that he was more than the sum of his worst mistakes. When she died, a part of Wright died with her. After more than 2 full decades of being completely cancer-free, Wright's lymphoma returned. This time, it was not the slow-growing, manageable form of the disease that he had beaten in the 1990s. It was aggressive and terminal. The doctors told him that there was no cure. The best they could do was to make him comfortable. He accepted the news with a quiet resignation that surprised some of his friends. He had been fighting for so long against cancer, against addiction, against public humiliation, and against depression. He was tired and was ready to stop fighting. Max Wright passed away on June 26, 2019, at the age of 75. The early media alerts from outlets like TMZ initially reported that he had died at his home in Hermosa Beach, California. But official industry and family records later confirmed that his passing actually occurred at the Lillian Booth Actors Home in Englewood, New Jersey. The Actors Home is a facility that provides housing and care for performers who have fallen on hard times, a place where old actors go when they have no one else to take care of them. Wright had spent his final days surrounded by people who understood the industry that had made him and broken him. Following his death, his remains were transported back to his home state of Michigan. He was formally buried alongside his family at Fairview Cemetery in Linden, Michigan, a quiet plot of land not far from where he had grown up. There were no cameras at the funeral, and no fans camped outside the gates. It was just family, a few close friends, and the people who had loved him, despite everything. Despite the scandals that had marked his final decades, major co-stars and fans flooded the internet with tributes, praising his exceptional comedic timing. People who had worked with him on ALF remembered him as a professional who showed up prepared even when he was miserable. People who had directed him in regional theater remembered him as an actor who could find depth in any role. Anne Shadeen, who played his wife on ALF, released a statement saying that the cast was devastated by his loss and that she remembered him as a brilliant actor who deserved better than the way the industry had treated him. Max Wright was a television star who found himself trapped in a role that made him miserable. He turned to illicit substances to escape the pain and spent the final decades of his life trying to rebuild something from the wreckage. He did not succeed in the way that Hollywood measures success. He did not make a triumphant comeback or write a memoir explaining himself. He just kept working, kept acting, and kept showing up for small parts in small theaters until the very end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.